I echo Matt's sentiments. It is such an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And it's also just really fun because I feel like we can talk to you about any number of things and go any direction. But I want to start with your book, just because that is front of mind for me. I've started reading it. It's called Driven. It's fabulous. You're also going to be speaking about it tonight at the Fillmore, we should say, in conjunction with Live Nation. So anyone who wants to also attend that, I think, can Google it, search it. But I've read comments in the media where you kind of said you never thought you would write a memoir. And I'm curious why you, in all of your history and everything you've done, thought that you wouldn't write a book about your own life.
Well, firstly, hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I've just arrived in Miami. Thank you to Bloomberg for hosting me. And it's such an exciting week to be in Miami. I love the Miami Grand Prix, even though the F1 Academy is not racing this weekend. And yes, here, predominantly because Driven, my book, launched in the US just on Tuesday. And it's such a funny question that you asked, because I guess I have so much on my plate with other things that I thought writing a book is a lot of work. So I didn't really see myself having the capacity. But the background story at the end of 2024, when we were just trying to get the momentum around F1 Academy, and for those of you that don't know what it is, it's a race series for young women, because we're trying to challenge the preconception that it's still a man's world, that it's macho. And I had this idea that it would be great to have a children's book of a little girl that raced, that parents could read to their daughters, that helped change the mindset shift of who belongs in racing. And I went to meet the six big publishers in London, and all of them had the same feedback for me. Well, we can do a children's book, but first you need to write your book. And at the time I thought I have zero capacity to write a book, but I went home to Scotland for Netflix filming, of all things, for Drive to Survive. And I was sitting with my brother, who's a film director. He's the creative one in the family. And we were catching up, and I said, I went to meet some publishing houses, and they said I should write a book. And he said, that's super interesting. If you would write a book, and how could it look, and the stories. And I suddenly sat there and thought, I will write a book, and I'm going to do it together with you. So I wrote the book together with my brother. Way more work than I anticipated.
Yes.
And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so 9 drafts later, my publisher eventually said, it's done. This is the final version. Now we need to get the book out. But it feels like with the cultural shift happening in F1, 42% of the global fan base is now female. The fastest growing fan demographic is the 18 to 24-year-old female. It felt like the right time to tell the story, because the sport that I competed in 2015, 2014, it's very different to the sport we see now, and that's something which I think F1 should take credit for, because they've put a lot of investment into F1 Academy, and we've just seen this big shift where we just have such a strong female fan base that also makes good business for us to connect with.
I wonder, we always talk to big CEOs and we've interviewed Toto, for example, on our podcast, team, principals, and I'm always interested in where you came from. And you have, I think, an especially interesting story in the Stoddard family and a motorcycle dealership in Scotland. It sounds so much fun, and also so, only in Great Britain do you have these mothers that are caning their children down the ski slopes, and encouraging them to do these extreme sports, and if you fall down, get up, walk it off, you're going to be fine. Tell us about how you grew up and what made you want to pursue a career in racing and a career in this sport.
You're not painting a very good light on my mother here.
She's a real badass.
I think it's awesome. It sounds great.
I actually want to read about her life as well, I should say.
Well, when I look back, how many of you in the audience have children? I don't want to say you look old, so maybe you have children, but okay, that's good. I think when I look back at my childhood, you're right, I had a mother. My mum met my dad when she bought her first motorbike from his shop. She used to race quads. So I grew up seeing a mother who was equal to my father. She ran her own business. And I have a brother who's only 15 months older than me. So where I'm so thankful when I look back, my parents never differentiated between son and daughter. It was never that my brother should get a motorbike and I should go off and play with a horse or with Barbie. I wanted a motorbike too. I got one. He raced. If I wanted to race, I raced. And a lot of people presume I was a little tomboy, but I loved Barbie, I loved pink, but I also loved racing. And they very much brought me up in an environment where I never once thought I was doing anything unusual for a girl. And the great thing about my sport is you wear a helmet. So actually when you're out on track, you don't see who your competitors are. And the great thing about sport is it's so pure. The result sheets count. So it didn't matter that I was the only girl out there. What mattered was how fast I was and if I was going to be able to compete at the front. But that environment that I grew up with, this definitely this toughness of you fall down, well, you dust yourself off and you pick yourself back up. And I'm so thankful I got that tenacity, because that definitely was probably the most important trait while I was racing. And I've realized in the world of business, it's also been a great tool.
I wanted to ask about that. You know, it seemed very normalized in your family that you would do everything, of course, that your brother did, but also that your parents did, whether it was skiing or swimming, motorbikes, karting. How important do you think it was for becoming who you are today that all of that was normalized across the board and there were no exceptions? And did you ever find a moment where you actually wished your parents might have actually carved out a little of a safety net for you? Did it ever feel that, oh, this is too much?
It never did, because they never pushed us. It was very much, there are the possibilities. If you work hard, you can be successful, and we're here to catch you if you ever fall. And even to this day, you know, I'm here in Miami with Toto. We've been in New York. It's my parents who are looking after my son. So they've really been such a support network, and without a doubt, I wouldn't be who I am today and where I am today without that foundation of love and support. And that environment that very much gave me that ambition and drive to say, well, I want to achieve, and there's no reason why I can't achieve if I work hard enough. So I definitely think our childhood plays such a big part in who we become, and also that they exposed me to the world of racing and what was possible. Because when I raced karts, I was racing at an international level, but as a youngster, you're not really thinking about the future or your career. But they took me to watch a Formula 3 race when I was 13. There was a young English driver called Jenson Button who won on that day. Of course, he went on to be pretty successful. But that's when I suddenly thought, I want to be a racing driver. I want to try and make it to Formula 1. And I had all these pictures on my wall of F1 drivers. Clearly, they were all men. But I look back at that little girl and I think to myself, did you not realize there was no other woman racing? And I didn't. It never once really occurred to me that I was the only woman. And of course, as my career progressed and the media attention around my success and my journey increased, it became so much about me being a woman. But I was just out there to be the best racing driver I could be. But suddenly the bigger story was the fact that I was a woman.
By the way, we've had Jensen on our podcast as well.
Yes.
In case you're
nice
wondering.
guy.
Woman or man, I think I would be scared, because you're driving. I mean, no one ever talks about this, right? Because we all watch racing and we're all involved to some extent in this story, but it is dangerous. You're driving very fast, and if you want to win, you have to be willing to make certain sacrifices with your safety, right? Have you never thought, like, especially like after you got married and had a kid, like maybe, I shouldn't be driving this quickly?
Well, I became a mother after I stopped racing, and I'm definitely glad I did it in that order, because I think that would be tough. I never once worried or had fear. I mean, I think people presume racing drivers are really, risk takers, but it's always calculated risk. We always know where the limit is. Clearly, to get onto pole position and be at the front, you need to be on the very edge of what's possible in a racing car. But I think it's more getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, because pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, getting to that stage, whether you're in a racing car or any other point in your life, that's where you kind of, the rewards are the biggest. And there was many points in my racing career and now in my business career where I threw myself in the deep end. It was uncomfortable, but I knew that was the moment where I would develop and grow the most. And I think as a racing driver, you never once actually think, oh, this is dangerous, because you're pushing for all the marginal gains out on track. And we're very lucky, and we don't take this for granted, that the sport is so much more safe now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And touch wood, we don't see fatal accidents nearly as often as in the past. So I think the sport, from a safety perspective, has also moved on.
Are you a big risk taker in other parts of your life too? Like in business or in investing, are you willing to take big risks?
I'm only willing to take big risks if I can cope with the worst case outcome. And I always calculate what the worst case outcome is. So I'm very decisive and I'm happy to take risk, but only if I can cope with what the worst case scenario would be.
I did want to ask about that too, and this kind of hinges on that question, the idea of control. Because when you start the book, you set us, we're in the car with you, the F1 car, you're doing the laps, and you kind of are saying the only thing I can't control is the weather. The only thing I can't, good thing the Brits and the Scots are good in the wet. And it made me think, are you a control freak? And is that bad? Is that good? And actually, how does that translate into your success in your career off the track as well?
I don't think I'm a control freak, but I like to control the controllables. Because I feel that in those moments of high pressure, it comes down to preparation. You know, I always like to put myself in the best possible position for success, which means the hard work and the preparation in the background, that's me. You know, there's nothing I haven't thought of. And I'm meticulous and I'm very disciplined, which drives my husband mad sometimes.
But isn't he the same? Wouldn't he be the same?
He is the same, but I always say, you know, there's East Coast time, there's European time, and then there's total time. And it's always 10 minutes after the hour. He can never get somewhere on time, despite being Austrian and quite meticulous. But I think that was just who I was always. It was in my character. So clearly being in a sport where it's all about precision, it probably got worse the longer I was in racing. And of course, Formula One, everything is down to the last detail. That's why I love the environment so much, but it probably didn't help my OCD.
I want to ask a little bit about control in driving and about the current formula and regulations, because I'm a bad driver on track. And I know that because...
You're like a man admitting he's a bad driver.
Well,
that is so unusual.
Fair.
I respect you for that.
I feel like I know intuitively I should always be either on the gas or on the brakes, right? I want to be controlling the load. And there shouldn't be a point where I'm lifting and coasting, right? Which is what I do too
So you've got
often.
the theory correct.
But now there are drivers who say they have to do that too much, especially in qualifying. You know, they have to stop and harvest the energy, you know. And I just wonder, what is your take on that? Because you worked so long in Formula E, and that is really an energy management exercise, right? But usually Formula One is like a limit driver exercise, and now it's become resource management as well.
It's a difficult one. I think people have varying opinions. I'm obviously in a situation now where I run a race series. So for me, fundamentally, it's about creating exciting racing. You need cars being able to overtake. You need to see an exciting race. And I think Formula One in the past was exciting to watch. There's some races, obviously, where we get unlucky and there's not a lot of action.
There's Monaco.
There's Monaco, terrible, exactly. But I also think it's about the challenge, and clearly this is a new challenge for the drivers. I think it's interesting that the drivers that are complaining, I mean, you go down the grid of results and they get...
Are we going to name names?
The complaints get louder the further down the grid you go. But I understand, you know, people are sometimes resistant to change, and this is a big change. But the world is changing. You know, electrification is part of where we are in the automotive industry, and we as a sport need to reflect that. So I think what's happened now is there's been a small tweak to the regulations for this weekend, but I think we will find our rhythm. I think fundamentally, as long as the racing is great, the drivers will get used to it, and there's definitely no way that the cars are easier to drive than in the past. It's probably much more mentally taxing for the drivers to do energy management and have that to manage alongside putting a quick lap in, but I certainly enjoy seeing just how much action there is out on track now, and that might create more action at Monaco.
It doesn't seem like artificial passing is enabled by this sort of yo-yo boost use. And then, of course, it's dangerous, right? If you have this super clipping where Ollie Behrman has to like avoid Colapinto and slam into a wall.
I think with the lifting and coasting, I mean, it's still an ultimate lap time. So whoever does it best will be the quickest driver. But I think that is the new challenge within the sport. And before we had DRS, but that was also an artificial tool to overtake. We have the limitations of the tyres, which stop a driver pushing. So I think there will always be factors that will be the limitation to a driver getting the ultimate lap time, but it's still going to be the driver that copes best within a set of regulations that will be world champion at the end of the year, and it's best man and best machine. Hopefully one day best woman.
Yeah, this is perfect. This is a perfect segue, because we should talk about F1 Academy and what you talk about change, you talk about progress. What are you seeing that indicate, okay, we're getting some traction with this, we're moving forward, we're evolving, we're advancing? Give us an overview of what you see where we are now.
So how many of you have heard of F1 Academy? That's pretty good. That's encouraging. I think we've seen this big shift culturally in the sport, where there's just so much more female interest in motorsport, which I love to see, because I was a little girl that loved racing, and I don't think there's any reason why women shouldn't embrace and enjoy the sport. And I'd have to give a lot of credit to F1, because it recognized this growing female fan base. It gave F1 Academy the platform and all the investment we needed to get up and running and create positive impact to see more women entering the sport. And I knew for it to be successful long term, it had to make business sense. And we're in the situation now where commercially there's a great return on investment. There are so many female-focused brands that want to come into this space, that want to activate, that want to talk to the fan base. And that's what's given us such a strong foundation, because the change will take time, but we've created this really strong impact in such a short space of time that's allowed us to see a lot of momentum.
What about the drivers themselves? How are you personally tracking and charting their progress? And even, I don't want to use the word coaching, but are you personally involved in helping them advance and refine their skills?
The great thing is we have a database of all female competitors worldwide that are competing, because in F1 Academy we always want to have the best 18 drivers. There's a high financial barrier to entry, and in F1 Academy we fund over 80% of every driver, which means it's a huge opportunity for any given young driver, and for us it's to make sure that we have the best 18 in any given season. And we have a great team. We have a talent development manager that's only looking to make sure that these drivers are given the right support. We have the 5 best junior teams who always so compete in F2 and F3, have created F1 world champions in their junior years. So we have definitely put an environment in place where talent can excel and that talent can be nurtured. Will then be us taking our champion and the most talented and making sure that she can rise up through the sport and on the way to Formula One.
Do you think if you had had that when you were younger, you may have gone even further down the road in your own career?
I never really look back and wonder. I definitely see the sports in a much better place now than it was when I competed. But I mean, 3 years ago we were here with F1 Academy, and after the race, which was 2 hours before the Formula One, the driver who had won the race, she was waiting to go on the podium, and I stood next to Stefano Domenicali, the CEO of F1, and she had a kind of tear in her eye, and she said, I just can't believe I'm about to go and stand on a podium at the Miami Grand Prix. And Stefano and I looked at each other and had a real sense of pride, because I suddenly thought, imagine an 18-year-old female driver, she had the race suit of an F1 team on, going to stand on a podium at the Miami Grand Prix. I could only have dreamed of that opportunity when I was a young driver, but I also felt such a sense of pride that we've come so far in the sport that was possible.
By the way, I think, there are a lot of people who maybe chauvinists who will say, like, women aren't strong enough, to compete with men in car racing and also in motorbikes. Hannah and I have been following, and I actually met this racer, Kayla Yakov.
Yes.
She's a motorcycle
Incredible.
racer. She recently was the first woman to podium at the Daytona 200, which is a grueling event. And she recently was the first woman to win pole position in a Moto America race. And she's a tiny little thing, right? But she's amazing. How long do you think it's going to be until we start to see women taking podiums, winning races in, MotoGP, in F1? Because clearly there's no physical, hindrance that would stop them. Clearly, they can and should be able to compete. So how long until we actually see it, start seeing it?
It's really interesting, the word you used, she's tiny. The great thing about motorsport is it doesn't come down to your size and your muscle mass or your muscle power, because the smaller and more compact you are, the more of an advantage it is. And that's why motorsport is one of the few sports alongside sailing and horse riding or jumping where men can compete with women. Because I'm the first to admit, I can't take on a man in a 100-meter race because he has 30% more muscle than me. But I don't believe this sport comes down to pure power. And if you look at the current F1 drivers, Lando Norris, Kimi Antonelli, they're tiny. Yeah. So I think physically, there's no reason why a woman can't compete in MotoGP or in Formula One. In Formula One, you have power steering. It doesn't even take a lot of strength to turn the wheel. It's G-force, which is the most challenging. But we had Dorian Pain, our F1 Academy champion, drive a Mercedes F1 car for the first time last week. 68 laps, no issue physically. So we do still have that undercurrent of chauvinistic opinions in the paddock that say, women. But I think the shift is happening, and the more talent we get entering, the more chance we have of the best competing at the very top.
But it's like 3 years, 4 years, 5
You want to nail me down here, right? I would like to think, I always feel bad when I say the next 5 to 10 years, because I think for the young girls competing now, they think, well, I don't believe that they're capable, which I don't want to say, but I do think we're on the right trajectory, and within 5 to 8 years, it's, I think, going to happen.
Cool.
Can't wait.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you
really
for having
appreciate
me.
it.
Have a lovely weekend.
And